The Department of Justice just dropped a memo that basically says this. A lot of those diversity prompts that law schools ask you to write, they might be illegal now. Their actual words, potentially unlawful. And this is not a fringe opinion. This came straight from the Attorney General of the United States. And if you're applying to law school this fall, this memo could change how admissions writes their essay prompts and, in turn, how you write your essays. But before you start spiraling, let's get one thing straight. Your biggest priority is not your diversity statement. It's the LSAT. More on that in a second. But first, let's translate those 14 pages of government speak into something normal humans can understand. On July 29th, the Department of Justice released a memo addressed to every federal agency. The message was crystal clear. If you take federal money, which includes basically every single law school, you are legally required to treat applicants equally without giving any preference based on race, sex, religion, or any other protected trait. Now, if you're thinking, okay, but law schools aren't saying they give preference, you're right. They're not saying it, but they are implying it through how they word their essay prompts, design their scholarship programs, and sometimes even how they assign interview slots. And here's where it gets interesting. The memo goes out of its way to call out things like essay prompts that ask about your lived experience, cultural awareness, or resilience in the face of systemic injustice. Programs that offer scholarships, fellowships, or internships only to specific racial or gender groups. Hiring practices that require a diverse slate or minimum number of underrepresented candidates, and buzzwords like intersectionality, representational equity, or identity-informed pedagogy. The DOJ says that all of this might violate federal anti-discrimination law, even if it's done with the best of intentions. The key legal phrase in this memo is unlawful proxy criteria. In other words, if your essay prompt or your program doesn't explicitly ask about race or gender, but it functions as a way to screen for race or gender, it could still be illegal. And this is the part that is tripping up schools, because they're used to walking a legal tightrope where the essay isn't required, but everyone knows it's not really optional either. And now they're realizing that even how they ask for your story could get them in trouble. So when we work with students, we always say this: don't just ask what they're asking, ask why they're asking it, and whether they're even allowed to anymore. Because when the DOJ starts sniffing around your application essay prompt, it's not a friendly suggestion. So here's the takeaway. If a school asks you to talk about overcoming adversity, make sure you're not walking into a legal minefield. If you want to talk about your background, that's fine. Just make the story about you and what you did, not who you are. And if you're reading prompts from multiple schools and thinking, wait, do they all want the same thing? Nope, they don't. That's part of the game. This memo didn't just signal a policy shift, it changed the rules right as the cycle is beginning, and not everyone got the memo, literally or figuratively. But you did, so now you can play smarter. So let's talk about what's coming next and what you can expect from law schools now that this DOJ memo is officially in the wild. In classic higher ed fashion, law schools are going to respond to this in three main ways. Some will panic and scramble to change everything overnight. These are the schools whose general counsel probably had a heart attack when the memo dropped. You can expect them to rip out words like diversity, lived experience, or overcoming obstacles from their essay prompts. They're going to swap in vague, legally safer language like distinct perspective or background that informs your values. And they're going to pretend that nothing changed while quietly emailing each other that they need to rework their forms this week. And for you, the applicant, it means you'll probably read a prompt and think, wait, what are they actually asking me? And don't worry, we're going to get to how to handle that. Other schools will pretend the memo didn't exist. And let's call this the ostrich method. They're going to stick their heads in the sand. These schools will leave their old essay prompts up, unchanged, untouched, and hope that nobody notices. They'll assume that nobody's coming after them, or they'll roll the dice and say, we'll deal with it if and when someone sues. Now, the risk here is that you might write an essay that fits the old expectations and gets flagged under the new legal reality. That's why, when we help our students with their admissions essays, we treat essay prompts like legal contracts. Not just what does this say, but what might this imply, and what could it expose you to? Now, there's a third category of schools that will try to hedge their bets, and these are the savvy ones. They're going to keep the prompt, but make it feel less like it's about race or gender. And they're going to add a disclaimer that the essay is optional and will not be used to evaluate you based on protected traits. Then they will update their internal rubric without telling you. In other words, they're going to try to have it both ways, legally defensible and still inclusive sounding, which sounds safe until it isn't. Now, here's what you need to know. You cannot rely on law schools to give you clarity right now. Many of them don't even know how to respond to themselves yet. And some are just waiting to see what other schools are going to do. And some are asking their lawyers if overcoming obstacles is now a banned phrase. Meanwhile, you're on your own deadline. So don't freak out over changing prompts. Don't waste energy trying to read between the lines of vague wording. And definitely don't try to be cute or push boundaries like saying, technically, they didn't say I couldn't write this. This is not the time to take a risk. Just write a strong, clear personal essay that shows maturity, insight, and actual decision making. Not labels, not ideology, not how many buzzwords you can fit in a paragraph. If you focus on substance over signaling, you'll be ahead of most applicants who are still stuck playing the old game. Now, no matter how many times admission officers say, we consider applications holistically, there's one part of your application that carries disproportionate weight. And it's not your resume, it's not your rec letters, and it's definitely not that diversity essay you spent 14 hours workshopping with ChatGPT. It's your LSAT score, full stop. Here's how this actually works behind the scenes. Admissions might read your personal statement, they might like your story, and they may even admire your character. But that all happens after they've looked at your LSAT and GPA. And if those two numbers aren't competitive for their medians, they're not going to fight the rest of the admissions committee on your behalf. They're going to put your file in the maybe pile, or worse, the no scholarship pile, and then move on. Law school is a rankings game. Admissions is judged and funded based on their stats. So unless you're a generational talent or the child of a major donor, you are a number first and a person second. Brutal? Yes. Unfair? Also yes. But it's true. And this is where most people get tripped up. They'll spend weeks agonizing over a 500-word essay while scoring a 154 on the LSAT and hoping admissions will see their potential. It doesn't work like that. When we work with students, especially those aiming for T14 law schools and scholarship money, we hammer this point from day one. The LSAT is your leverage. Everything else is a bonus. Why? Because your LSAT score doesn't just get you in. It gets you paid. If you can raise your score by 5, 10, 20, 30 points, you're suddenly in the running for scholarships that cover $50,000, $100,000, or even full rides. Meanwhile, a beautiful, well-written essay might get you a smile, and we wish you the best of luck. Let's be honest, law schools aren't out here crying into their coffee over your paragraph breaks. They're updating a spreadsheet. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by all the essay drama, do this. Forget the politics for a minute. Forget the essay forums, the debates, and the DOJ memos, and ask yourself, have I actually mastered the LSAT yet? If the answer is no, that's your next step. And you don't need to be a perfect test taker, you just need a plan. You need to know what's working, what's not, and how to break through your score plateau. Once your LSAT's locked in, great. Then we can go back to perfecting your essays, negotiating scholarships, and planning your optional addenda like a boss. But LSAT first, always. Now let's say you've already written your diversity statement. You poured your heart into it. Maybe you talked about identity, adversity, and systemic barriers, and now you're hearing, this might be legally risky. Great. What now? Take a breath. You don't need to start from scratch, but you do need to revise with intention. Here is your exact playbook. First, don't delete your essay. Seriously, don't burn it all down. The story you told, the obstacles you faced, they're real, and you lived them. That's not the issue. The issue is how the story is framed and what language you used to tell it. You want to reframe your essay around action, not identity. Because, to be blunt, what the DOJ is targeting here is not your life experience. It's when schools reward you for your demographic box. So shift the focus. Instead of saying, as a Black woman, I've had to overcome, say, in my sophomore year, I noticed most local tenants didn't know their rights, so I organized a legal literacy workshop and got over 100 people to attend. person could have the same background, but a totally different framing. The second version shows leadership, initiative, problem solving, which are all things that law schools actually value. And bonus, it doesn't trigger legal alarms. We see this all the time when we help our students rework their essays. Most of the substance is great, it just needs to be repackaged so it shows what you did, not just who you are. You also want to cut the buzzwords. If your essay sounds like it could double as the intro paragraph of a sociology term paper, we've got a problem. I'm talking about phrases like intersectional lens, resilience narrative, and historically excluded identity. And look, I get it. That stuff might be normal on your college campus, and you might mean every word of it. But in this new legal landscape, that kind of language looks like a flashing neon sign that says, I am using my identity as a proxy for admission consideration. Instead, write like a regular person would actually speak in everyday life. Use clear, simple language. Tell a story. Show your growth. Let your experiences speak for themselves. Now, you also got to, of course, double check the prompt. Make sure it hasn't changed since last time you looked. Because some schools are going to revise their prompts. Some already have, and some won't change a thing. Regardless, that means the essay you wrote in July might not fit the prompt that's posted in September. So before you hit submit, go back and reread each school's latest language. Are they asking for a diversity essay, or did they quietly change it to a background or perspective essay? If they do still ask about adversity, do they give specific guidelines about what they want? Your job here is not to game the system. It's to make sure you're answering the actual question they're legally allowed to ask. And if they've added a disclaimer like, please don't address protected characteristics, then don't. Seriously. Don't be that person who tries to sneak in a race or gender reference in paragraph 3 and hopes the reader doesn't notice. They will. You are applying to law school here, so follow the rules. Now, what if you haven't written any of your essays yet? That's actually great. You're in the best possible position because you haven't spent 10 hours on an essay that might get flagged. You haven't accidentally written something that could be a legal risk for the law school. You are starting clean. So let's make sure you do it right. Now, here are your 3 main options for how to handle the diversity or adversity essay prompts. Your first option is to skip the essay entirely. That is allowed. Optional could really mean optional, especially this year. If you've got a strong LSAT and a strong GPA, and you're applying to schools where you're already competitive, you don't need a diversity statement or a perspective essay. In fact, in this new climate, not writing one might actually be the safer move. Less risk, no landmines. Focus on your main personal statement and keep it sharp. Your second option is to write about something that doesn't involve protected characteristics. If the story doesn't involve race, gender, religion, and so on, you don't need to lawyer-proof it. So pick a moment from your life that taught you something difficult, forced you to take action, and shows who you are under pressure. Think about, for example, a job where you had to deal with tough customers and came out better for it, or a decision you regret and how you handled the fallout, or a time you changed your mind about something big. These essays can be incredibly compelling and legally clean at the same time. Why? Because they highlight personal growth, judgment, and resilience without touching anything that screams, read this with legal counsel. This is also what we recommend a lot of our students do when they don't have a traditional adversity story, but they still want to add depth to their application. And spoiler, these essays often perform better than identity-based ones because they stand out more. Now, your third option is to actually write about your background or adversity, but you've got to do it smart. So if you do want to talk about hardships you faced, that's totally fine. But the key is the story cannot be about your identity. It's got to be about your choices. Don't write, as someone with XYZ background, I've often felt excluded in academic spaces. Instead, write, our mock trial team had no girls on it, so I fought to join, trained every weekend, and ended up winning state. You see what happened there? Identity is part of the context, but not the focus. The action is the centerpiece. And so this reads like a future law student, not someone checking off demographic boxes. You are not denying who you are, just make sure your essay is about what you did and how that makes you a stronger candidate. And also, by the way, if you're unsure whether something you're writing could be flagged as a proxy for race or sex, check your verbs. Are you describing yourself or are you showing something you did? If the verbs are am, feel, identify, or have been, rethink it. That's describing yourself. Instead, if the verbs are built, led, organized, or solved, that's action-based and you're on the right track. Now, one more thing here. Please don't try to be clever and bend the rules. Don't try to test the boundaries. Please don't write an identity-based essay and then slap on a note saying, this is not intended to express a protected trait. Admissions readers are smart, and their legal departments are watching closely. Don't make them guess what your essay is trying to say, and don't try to game the system with technicalities. It is not worth the risk. Now, the DOJ didn't release this memo as a one-off. They sent it to every federal agency, and they named schools, scholarships, DEI offices, and essay prompts directly. That's not just legalese, that's a warning shot. So here's what we're tracking right now and what you should keep your eye on too. First, you want to look for which law schools change their essay prompts. Some are going to be obvious. They'll delete words like diversity, identity, background, or lived experience. Others are going to be a bit more subtle, swapping in vague terms like unique perspective or personal lens. Same idea, different words. This is why you can't reuse one essay across 10 different schools anymore. And yes, when we work with students, we track those changes and tailor each essay accordingly, because close enough is not going to cut it anymore. Now, a lot of law schools will drop the diversity essay altogether. If they think a diversity essay prompt could get them sued, or if general counsel tells them to shut it down, they might just drop it entirely. Some might replace it with a new prompt like, tell us about a time that you changed your mind, or what motivates your interest in law. These are legally safer, but they still give schools insight into who you are. So be ready to pivot with your essays. And we may also even see applicants start facing pushback from law schools. We might see stories of applicants who get asked to revise or resubmit an essay after they submit something that reads too much like identity-based advocacy. Or worse, some applicants might not hear back anything and just quietly get dinged or ignored because someone in admissions flagged their essay as being legally risky. Will this happen to everybody? Of course not. But in an ultra-competitive cycle, even a whiff of risk costs you a seat or a scholarship. Now, in the legal world, this DOJ memo might lead to lawsuits from advocacy groups with a political agenda, congressional hearings, more internal policy updates from law schools, and quiet pressure from donors or trustees. But even if none of that happens, the culture has already shifted. Admissions is now going to think twice before encouraging anything that smells like racial or gender preference. That alone is enough to affect how they read your application, even if nothing changes on the website. In the meantime, we'll keep tracking this closely. We'll be watching the prompt updates, applicant experiences, and school policies. And when something big changes, we're going to break it down for you in plain English, not with any footnotes or federal code. Because the last thing you need is to be surprised in October when half your essay strategy is suddenly off limits. So let's zoom out for a minute. Yes, this DOJ memo is a major shakeup. And yes, it changes how schools can legally ask for your story. And yes, it's going to cause confusion, second guessing, and probably more than one admissions office meeting that starts off with, so, are we allowed to do this? But let's be honest, the most powerful thing in your application still hasn't changed. It's your LSAT score. You can write a beautiful essay. You can perfectly navigate the new legal guidelines, and you can be authentic, vulnerable, strategic, all of it. But if your LSAT score is weak, you're not getting in and you're not getting any money. Meanwhile, if your score is strong, you've got options, real ones, even if your essay is just fine, even if you skip the optional essays entirely, and even if you play it safe and don't say anything personal at all. Because here's what law schools actually care about. Can you think logically under pressure? Can you handle dense reading? And can you spot flaws in arguments? And can you score well on a test like the LSAT that predicts first-year law school performance? That's what the LSAT measures, and that's what goes into their medians, and that makes you valuable to them. So, if you're still tweaking your diversity essay for the 7th time, but you haven't yet cracked a 160, you're solving the wrong problem. Fix your LSAT score first. Then, and only then, circle back to your essays. Be clear, be concrete, be careful, and move on.